Hi, if you are watching this video, most likely you want to learn more about purchase orders and subscriptions relationships in the marketplace platform of SoftwareOne. And of course, in general, how B2B subscriptions are changing traditional procurement processes in enterprises. So the context of this video is that we're receiving a lot of questions that in general revolve around purchase orders and subscriptions. And apparently this is a hot topic for enterprises. And the answer to that question, to those questions, is not trivial. And in many cases, the answer is it depends. So to understand answers to these questions better, please watch this video. So the story of subscriptions is not new, and it already became mainstream in B2C software. An average consumer in the United States has somewhere between 4 to 5 subscriptions today. And so we all know all those services, and we know in general how subscriptions work with Netflix and Adobe Creative Cloud and all those other services. But in the world of subscriptions of B2B and procurement processes in general, the process of transition to subscriptions is still in the early stages. So when we look at the current state of subscriptions adoption in B2B, well, there are different projections and different estimates, but all of them show more or less the same picture that we can expect the software procurement for enterprises to be mostly around subscriptions in 2030s, so in 10 years from now, more or less. And when we look at the phase of the transition right now, we're actually barely in the early majority, maybe still in the early adopter stage. So there's still a huge route to go, and the processes of subscriptions is not trivial for many people in enterprises procurement. So we know we are currently in the state where we know that subscriptions are most likely the future of our industry, but the process of how to work with them is not trivial. So a lot of people need to learn. So hopefully this video will help you to understand how to deal with that. And let's start by looking at the challenges of traditional transactional, quote unquote, procurement in the era of subscriptions. And transactional software procurement, if we skip all the complex stages of quotation and all of that, is actually very trivial. So a client who wants to buy software from the vendor essentially sends a purchase order to them. Then vendor receives that purchase order, processes it, and issues an invoice after the license is allocated, for example. And that invoice corresponds to the original purchase order as one-to-one. Then this order is sent back to the client. Client can reconcile this invoice to the original purchase order, and the process is complete until the next order is sent. Simple, straightforward. This is how our industry operated for maybe 50 years, since 70s and 80s. And everything is awesome and nice, but when subscriptions come into the picture, into the landscape, everything changes. Well, maybe not everything, but a lot of things actually change. And the biggest difference is that with subscriptions, orders are not directly related to invoices. This might not be obvious, but just think about this. You can place an order for extra seats during the month, like multiple times, and you will receive only one invoice at the end of the month. Or, as simple as it might sound, you might not be placing any orders, but your subscriptions will be still renewing and you will be receiving invoices. So the relationship between invoices and orders in the world of subscriptions is many to many. It's actually not trivial. And if you try to reconcile orders with invoices in the procurement department directly, without some planning, it's actually a huge headache because the matching between the order and invoice in the subscription economy is not so trivial. So the question is how this process is actually supported by enterprise procurement systems. There are so many these days. And if we look at those systems and their documentation and best practices, we will see that all of them have a similar idea. But this idea has a different name. Sometimes they call it a standing order, sometimes they call it as recurring purchase order or blanket purchase order or recurring purchase agreement, open purchase order, a lot of different names. Actually, I probably wasn't able to name even a fraction of those. The industry is very fragmented, but all those different words have the same meaning. The idea is exactly the same. So let's take a look at that idea. And for the sake of our conversation, I will be using the term of recurring purchase order. But when I say that, please keep in mind that the name in your system might actually be different. It may be blanket purchase order or something else. So every system, every modern system at least, when it comes to procurement, has the standard purchase order, the purchase order that implements the standard procure to pay business process, where each purchase order is linked to a single invoice. And modern procurement systems also support the recurring purchase order process, or blanket or open or some other name. And this type of purchase order or agreement, if you will, exists in a long-term relationship, allowing multiple invoices to be associated with this single object. So when it comes to subscriptions, it's very important to build your process around that object. And you should avoid trying to work with purchase orders when it comes to subscriptions. Because when you have this recurring purchase order object and business process around that, then the reconciliation process is actually quite trivial. Because instead of trying to reconcile your invoice to the order that flies to the vendor to change the status of the subscription, you have an object on your side that is linked with the actual agreement with the subscription, which is then linked to the invoice. If you do that this way, your business process becomes much, much simpler. Then the question is, how is this process supported by the SoftwareOne marketplace platform? And in order to answer that question for our platform, which essentially facilitates transactions between our clients and vendors, in a lot of countries where SoftwareOne is present, we need to know about the following objects. We need to know about orders and subscriptions in our platform. And we need to know that those objects are linked with the agreement. Agreement represents the relationship between the entity of SoftwareOne and client in certain region and legal entities of that client, specifically buyer and licensee. And business transactions in our platform are represented by the order. And those orders could be of different types. They could be a purchase order, multiple change orders, termination orders. And those orders are actually placed by you in a self-service way in our platform to modify the state of subscriptions. While subscription on another side is an object that is linked to an agreement that represents a provision of service over extended period of time. And there could be multiple subscriptions in the scope of the same agreement, which is actually quite common for Microsoft services, for example. Typically, our clients would have multiple subscriptions. Same goes for Adobe and other services. And the only way to modify the subscription in our platform, of course, is to place the order. Right? So there is no way to modify subscriptions directly. So when you link your procurement system to our platform, it's very important to establish this relationship on the level of recurring purchase order on the side of the procurement system and agreement on the side of the marketplace platform. So don't try to link it to the order itself, because you might have multiple orders or no order at all, and you will still need to link it to the invoice. If you do it this way, then when you receive an invoice, it will be a very simple reconciliation process. Because every invoice of SoftwareOne, when it comes to recurring services, will have a link to agreement in our platform. It will have a link to your recurring purchase order, which is additional identifier that you set on the agreement, and link to all the subscriptions that participate in the agreement. And you can set that identifier of your recurring purchase order during the order placement or at any moment of time by modifying the agreement object and setting this property of the additional ID. So it's super simple. So to summarize, the answer to all those questions that we receive is typically yes, it is possible to establish this relationship with the purchase order as long as it's the proper type of the purchase order, recurring purchase order. And it needs to be supported in your procurement system. It might have a different name, and but still you need to learn your system and understand the difference. Because if you will try to use the standard procurement process, standard purchase order to work with the subscriptions, it will most likely be a very painful process and it will still not match. It's like trying to fit a round peg into the square hole. So thank you. I hope it was helpful and help you to understand the world of subscriptions and modern enterprise procurement. If you have any questions, please reach out to us or read our documentation. Thank you very much, guys, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.